Hello, everyone. Welcome to Disenthrall. I am Patrick Smith, and we have Kaysen spinning the clock over there for us. Today we have a really cool, exciting debate show for you today. I am excited and pleased, and I can't wait to get into it. Today we have Marco den Ouden. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Disenthrall. I am Patrick Smith, and we have Kaysen spinning the clock over there for us. Today we have a really cool, exciting debate show for you today. I am excited and pleased, and I can't wait to get into it. Today we have...
Got it.
I'm not hearing any feedback.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
All right, awesome.
I'm okay.
So on one side, on the sort of open border side, we'll let him describe his position. We have Marco den Ouden. Marco is the creator of the Jolly Libertarian blog and an occasional contributor to the Foundation for Economic Education. His libertarian roots go back to 1969 when he discovered the works of Ayn Rand, twice making the pilgrimage from Montreal to Boston to hear her speak. After moving to Vancouver, British Columbia, Marco helped the Libertarian Party of Canada develop a presence in British Columbia and was an organizer of the 1996 Libertarian International Conference at Whistler, BC. In his personal life, Marco is retired after 40 years in the television news business. He lives in Abbotsford, BC with his wife, Janice. He is the father of 2 children and the proud grandfather of a beautiful girl named Novali. I believe I said that right?
Novali. Novali.
All right, Marco, if you could give us a quick intro and you give us the bullet points of your position.
Okay. First, I'd like to thank Pat and Kaysen for inviting me on the show. I have never done a podcast before, and this is my very first one, and so it's a real pleasure to be here. And I also want to thank Victor for proposing this discussion. We've discussed this issue to some extent on Facebook, but that is not a medium that's very conducive to rational debate, and so I welcome this opportunity for a fuller discussion. We're supposed to keep these introductory remarks brief, so I'll try and just offer what my talking points are. I developed 4 different arguments, and I'm going to start by conceding most of Victor's points. I mentioned in the promotion that I did on my Facebook account for this debate that I'm going to tick off a lot of people, including both open borders and closed borders people. So I think I'm going to tick off the open border people first, because I'm going to concede most of Victor's points, and I'm going to accept all his main concerns at face value and concede that I share these concerns, specifically the violence and the descent into lawlessness that's occurring in parts of Europe. But I'm going to attack his inability to voice a plan of action. I'll argue that governments, insofar as they exist, are not totally evil and do in fact have a valuable role to play in society, namely the protection of individual rights against violence or threat of violence. And unlike Victor, I'm actually going to make some positive suggestions on what I think governments facing insurrection and a descent into lawlessness should do. I'm going to do this because Victor seems to be too timid to actually say what he thinks should be done. Hardcore anarchists are undoubtedly going to condemn me for this, and if that's what they want to do, so be it. I'm also going to present my arguments are not going to include open borders, though. I'm going to make suggestions on what government should do, but they do not include open borders. I will present a case for open borders, and I'll start by defining what I mean by open borders and closed borders. And I'm going to use a reductio ad absurdum to arrive at a position. And that's going to be followed later by an attack on Hans Hermann Hoppe's position. Hans Hermann Hoppe has probably created the most effective and well-known libertarian argument for closed borders, or severely restricted borders. Not closed borders, but restricted borders. I'm going to argue that Hoppe's arguments his points actually lead to an open border position. And finally, I'm going to, if I have the time, because I wrote this one last night, over the last couple of days, I'm going to attack Victor's specific arguments in some of his points and point out some inconsistencies and some wrong conclusions he's come to. And I'll explain why I think he's strayed from libertarian thought. And I'm going to Well, let me tell you that the article that I wrote in the last 2 days is called "The Demonization of the Other." I find that Hoppy's expression of human trash, Christopher Chase Rachel's use of terms like shit tier people, and a lot of the demonization of Muslims that Victor engages in is frankly disgusting. And that I find that this is collectivist thinking, and we are, as individualists, as libertarians, we are individualists, and we should judge people on their own personal merits, not on the basis of some group that they happen to be in. So I'm going to attack that. But when I wrote this article, I read it over last night when I finished it, and it ended up being read aloud 23 minutes long, which is a little bit long. So I'm not going to be able to go into all of that. I don't even know if I get to any of it, but I will certainly publish it on my blog. And that's it.
All right. Thank you, Marco. Next, let's go to Victor Pross. Let me read his intro here. Victor Pross is a professional Vancouver artist. He's known for his extreme caricaturing and imaginative artworks. He's an artist. Victor has many high-profile commissions to his credit, including painting Ron Howard's caricature portrait for the famous director, as well as painting various agents of the William Morris Agency. As Canada's premier caricaturist, Victor has rendered numerous international celebrities and Canadian media personalities for commercial and private purposes. A documentary movie is in production featuring Victor's life and art titled Pop Goes the Culture, based on his book by the same name. He is the founder of Vancouver's Real Sons of Anarchy live speaking events, which is devoted to the spread of libertarian anarchist ideas. Victor gives live presentations along other speakers such as Tim Moen and Walter Block, to name a few. Hi, Victor. Welcome to the show. If you could give us your 3-minute intro.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, just to break the ground on my basic stance on the whole issue of open or closed borders. My position is on the subject is, I guess, pretty straightforward. My opening statement is not going to be like a didactic or empirical one, but more just logical, and we can go from the two empirical matters into the discussion. Now, the subject of closed versus open borders, it is true, it's proven to be a rather heated conversation with much division among many different circles of people, like conservatives and liberals, but there's also that division and arguing in the libertarian/anarchist circles as well, as we can see. And where we do find some libertarians are either for open borders and other libertarians are for closed borders. And where do I stand on the issue? Well, let me say from the start that I am an advocate for the free market and private property. I am a Rothbarian private property card-carrying, non-aggression principle-loving anarchist. And therefore, because of that, I am not for closed or open borders. They are state constructs. Maybe Marco agrees with me up to this point. I am for a stateless society, which means I am for private property. In a fully free society, there are no borders, as the term is understood in the current paradigm. So I find it a rather curious paradox that anarchists would be for either closed or open borders. Let me repeat it. I am not for closed or open borders. They are state constructs. I am for a free society, which means I am for private property. And in a free society, borders, if we're to use that term, are determined and enforced by private property owners instead of a relatively small cadre of people calling themselves government. Immigration only happens according to private property norms and the society that I would call for. So basically, the whole open versus closed borders is actually a false economy. It would be ridiculous for libertarians to find themselves on two opposing sides of being for the welfare state or for taxation for other purposes. Okay, it's ridiculous. It's just as ludicrous to be for open or closed borders. It's a false economy. Okay, and if there is to be the abolishment of government, borders is no longer a relevant conversation. So by contrast, this isn't a conversation. This is the type of conversation that you hear among statists. Statists are sold on the false dichotomy. I'm not. Does that wrap up my time?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Victor. So
Okay.
my only job here is to be impartial. Kaysen's on the clock for us. My job is to advocate for the viewer, to make sure we keep things moving and exciting. So with that said, with that said, you guys are also welcome to submit questions on the live stream page, and we will have a segment for that coming up here in a little bit. Next up, we're going to do 10-minute rebuttals, starting with Marco. Marco?
Okay, well, this is not going to be much of a debate, I'm afraid, because I'm going to concede most of Victor's points right off the bat. I concede the following, that there is, in fact, a crisis in Europe with a lot of violence being perpetrated by foreign elements who have moved to these countries, notably France, Germany, Sweden, and Britain. I concede that most of this violence is being perpetrated by people claiming to be Muslims, and in many cases, in the name of their religion. And I concede that such places include so-called no-go zones where lawlessness is so extreme that the police and ordinary domestic citizens fear to go into them. But here's where I differ from Victor. One of the issues that Larkin, and indeed you, Pat, have had in discussing this with Victor is his lack of candor when it comes to prescribing what he sees as a solution to the problem. Larkin pressed him repeatedly, and he wouldn't say. Shortly after that, I transcribed part of the debate and concluded that they were arguing apples and oranges, that each was using a different definition of borders. And given their respective positions, each of them was correct. Victor surprisingly came out with a statement that was clear and forthright just as I was working on this transcript. It was the sort of statement that Larkin, in fact, had been trying to get him to come out with. I cited that at the end of the transcript, and here's the key sentence that he said, and it's in a Facebook post of February 28th. Quote, "Given that we live in a world with government at the center of society, I would basically ban the immigration of Muslims into the country, but basically as an act of self-defense, as a matter of consistent principle, and in particular in Europe where terrorism attacks are committed by Muslims. I think the burden of proof has to be on anybody coming in to try to prove that they are moderates, that they are truly not at risk of becoming radicals and becoming a threat to Europe," end quote. Now, from my understanding, Victor has changed his position on that. I haven't seen him formally retract that statement, but from his later ones, I think he has, in fact, retracted that. He started by saying that he was against both open and closed borders, which is the Hoppian position. And I eagerly agreed with him and said that was exactly the issues. We should have no borders at all. I agree with him, absolutely. But then he came out with a statement that was kind of odd. He said he was opposed to open borders, closed borders, and no borders. Now, I found this rather confusing, but he did clarify it later by saying he was for private borders, which means private property lines. But as I will argue later, in common usage, borders and private property lines are not the same thing. Lately, he's come out saying specifically, and I quote, and this was from a Facebook post of June 18th, quote, "I don't expect or call on the state to do anything," end quote. Now, he correctly calls borders a state construct, and he relentlessly criticizes European governments, and in particular, the German government of Angela Merkel. But he doesn't want them to do anything. He says, "I don't expect or call on the state to do anything." He doesn't even call on them to rescind the policies that he says created Germany's current problems. So I don't know. There was an article recently in a book magazine called National Interest. If you can put up a link there. The article was by Dr. Cheryl Bernard, and it's called, "I've worked with refugees for decades. Europe's Afghan crime wave is mind-boggling." Now, she is from Austria, and she has a long, detailed list of the rapes and violence perpetrated largely by Afghani youth in Austria. And she analyzes and deconstructs this in great detail. Now, Ms. Bernard is an expert on the field of Muslim migration, and she has worked with immigration programs. She is sympathetic to refugees and migrants, as am I. when you see the violence that's perpetrated in countries like Syria, the bombed out homes and the violence that goes on, or some of the violence and the horrors that are going on in Africa, who can blame these people for trying to get the hell out of there, trying to find freedom somewhere in the world, getting away from this? Dr. Bernard has written a book called Civic Democratic Islam. She's written a book called Building Moderate Muslim Networks, and a book called The Muslim World After 9/11. And she's written a book called Euro Jihad, Patterns of Islamist Radicalization and Terrorism in Europe. She understands exactly what she's talking about, and she calls for the government to do certain specific things, things that Victor is reluctant to call for. But she calls for, among other things, and I agree with her absolutely, that any immigrant or migrant to a country that commits violent acts, that indulges in rape, robbery, or any sort of violence should be immediately deported. Absolutely kick them out, throw them out of the country, get them back to where they came from. Now, she says the law will have to be changed in order to do that. But, Victor, his position is, I don't want the state to do anything. He doesn't want them to kick violent perpetrators out. Come on, that should be at least a minimum position. She also calls for extreme vetting in some cases. She talks about how some Afghani youth, and she focuses on Afghani youth because she says most of the violence is actually created by Afghanis, not Syrians, as is commonly thought. She says that they know how to game the system, how to get on welfare, and they lie through their teeth, some of these people, in order to, they lie about their age, they lie about their origins, they lie about their marital status and other things. And she says that undocumented immigrants, people who don't have proper documentation, should be absolutely thoroughly vetted to find out their proper age. If they have to do blood tests and other things to do that, do that. They should do that. Now, Victor talks about the no-go zones. Victor's going to be shocked by this, but in no-go zones like they have in France, where there is sectarian violence and people are afraid to go there because of the violence, the police are even afraid to go there, declare martial law. Send in the army, send in the troops. Tell those people there that they're going to follow the law, they're going to be nonviolent, and if they don't like that, well, then they can get the hell out of the country. So, call me a statist if you want for that. But I believe that governments have an obligation and a duty to combat violence, to secure the safety of their citizens. That is the only proper function of government, is to secure the people's safety against violent aggressors domestically, criminals, hoodlums, thugs, murderers, robbers, what have you, and to protect against external enemies. Ayn Rand, an advocate of limited government, said that this was a proper function of government, that government should do this. But Victor is afraid of being labeled a statist. He is cowed by sort of an inverse political correctness, if you will, or I can't remember the phrase, but he is so afraid of being labeled a statist that he is unable to articulate what he thinks governments like Angela Merkel's should do. He won't even say that they should rescind the policies that they have in place that he says created these problems. That should be the minimum that he advocates, that they rescind these policies. And he should advocate policies like going in with the troops, the army and military if necessary, to quell violence where it occurs, and to expel, to deport people that engage in violent acts to the countries that they came from. And that to me is a minimum, and that Victor advocates doing nothing, not a damn thing, is absolutely outrageous. To me, it is cowardly evasion. And if Victor is really concerned about what's happening in Europe, the problems occurring in Europe, he should propose what he thinks the governments there should do instead of attacking people like Clark and Rose, who, whether you agree with them or not, is merely stating his opinion on open borders. Victor, I just want to say that Larkin is not your enemy. The governments of Europe are your enemy, and you should focus on them. You should get your focus back.
Thank you,
That's
Marco. Perfectly timed, actually. Well done. Victor, your rebuttal, 10 minutes.
Well, sure. Yeah, no, there certainly is a big truckload of things to break off there, but I guess I'll just start with the first part by regarding my position where Muslims are concerned, where we can draw a little bit further, Marco, if you want to, in regards to how appalling that might be, what my stands are on Muslims or Islam or whatnot. I know that there's a lot of people who like to comment at this issue so you don't like brown people, and the racist charge comes in Islamophobia and blah, 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 blah. So let's deal with that subject right here and now. I've covered it before. I've mentioned it numerous times, and in your accounting of my Facebook history there in the last 4 months or whatnot, I'm not sure why you hadn't taken heed of this, but if we ask the question, what is a Muslim? A Muslim, in a literal translation, means simply a man of Islam or a person of Islam. It's someone who attempts to live by the philosophy of Islam. A Muslim is a person. We're not talking about a race here. We're talking about a person who's adopting a specific kind of ideology. So Islam, as far as that's concerned, is a social political system. That is the system in question here. It's the ideas that concern me. Muslims are not a race. I don't care about skin pigmentation. I'm probably going to go for a tan later on today, so I really don't care to got to darken myself up a little bit here. It is the so-called radical Muslims that concern me. Again, it's the ideas, it's the politics, it's the religion that concerns me, and for very good reason, which can be demonstratively, empirically validated, that we have cause for concern here. Islam is more than just a religion. For those people who are sensitive to the issue of religious freedom, that's fine, but fundamentally, Islam is a full-blown socio-economic system that requires integration of church and state. It requires the law of the land to be the law of the religion. Those laws are from the Dark Ages for the most part. There is a connection between the terrorism and Islam. The nature of Islam, I'm very critical of that. Yes, I receive all kinds of doubts and challenges concerning the fundamental nature of Islam. Doubts as to whether jihad or I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that. How do you pronounce that? Jihad?
Jihad, I think.
Jihad, yeah. Jihad against non-believers, infidels, Western civilization in general, and it's whether that's an integral weave of the Islamic cloth. I would argue that it is jihad against non-believers, infidels, the West in general, homosexuals. Absolutely treats their women like crap. This is integral and is a part of the whole cloth of what Islam is all about, subjugation. It is true that many Muslims who live in the West, like most Christians, reject religious fanaticism. They're law-abiding and loyal citizens, which is to say that they are peaceful. Yes, there is that. But that is because they have accepted some Western values, including respect for reason, a belief in individual rights, and the need for a separation between church and state. So it's only to the extent that they depart from their religion and from a society that imposes it, that if that they achieve prosperity, freedom, and peace. To the extent that they distance themselves from these kind of ideologies and embrace the Western canon. How am I on time there, Patrick?
You've got almost 6 minutes left.
Oh, okay, Patrick, you can't hear me?
I can hear you. You have about
Okay.
5.5 minutes left.
Okay, now very good. Okay. Now but on the other hand, many Muslims are not good people, by which I mean like they're not necessarily self-detonating lunatics, although there is that risk. If we look at some stats, we can find that a full 20% of British Muslims sympathize with the London subway bombings. 31% of younger British Muslims say the London bombings were justified, compared to 14% of those over 45. This is a Pew Research. We have, in 2007, 26 of younger Muslims in America believe suicide bombings are justified. 35% of young Muslims in Britain believe in suicide bombings are justified, etc. So this is pretty abhorrent. In regards to immigration and welfare, if we are speaking of the welfare state and immigration, we cannot separate these two things. If we have a welfare state and Europe is absolutely awash in it, it's like a metaphysical absolute as far as they're concerned, that is a problem that has to be focused on. We do focus on that by spreading ideas of liberty. We have the internet. That's all well and good. But in the meantime, the welfare state is not something that's going to evaporate overnight, either because of ideological barriers or because of just the mechanics of it on a practical level of dismantling the welfare state in Europe. But if we have a welfare state in regards to immigration and the mass influx of people from third world countries that are steeped in these type of ideologies, it's a calling card. Okay, you're ringing the dinner bell. You're asking for problems. Okay, I understand the issue of just narrowing it down to the specific individual, but we cannot sidestep the fact, sociological facts of where these people are coming from. And so long as you have a welfare state, and so long as you have people who do neither have an acceptance or understanding of the Western canon, you're asking for problems. I can cut it off right from there, so I don't overwhelm the listener, because you had a lot of other objections there, but we can pick that up.
Okay. Well, thanks for being frugal with the viewers' time. Marco, do you want to do a 5-minute rebuttal, or feel free to ask?
I just want to ask Victor a question. He's got 3 minutes left, and I just want to ask him specifically. You said that I don't call on the state to do anything. He doesn't want the state to do anything. Now, we got serious problems in Europe, and problems that need to be resolved. If he doesn't want the state to do anything, not even rescind the laws that he says created these problems, how's the problem going to get solved? Why doesn't he call on at least rescinding the laws that these governments have passed? And why doesn't he call for expulsion of violent offenders and sending them back, deporting them back to their homelands? That to me is a reasonable position. It's not anti-libertarian. It's not inconsistent with the libertarian and anarcho-capitalist position on self-defense. So why doesn't he advocate that? Why doesn't he support that?
Victor, you have about 2 minutes.
Okay, yeah. Look, the culture is sick. Politics is a result of fundamental philosophy. Would you not agree? Look, the politicians consider, for example, the children who were killed in the London terrorist attacks at the Grande concert as collateral damage for the sake of a larger agenda. It's an agenda. It's the agenda that's important. And as you know, if you're going to make an omelet, you have to break a few eggs. That's their attitude towards this whole thing. They are trying a social experiment in what can be called multiculturalism or altruism. They have an agenda here. They're not listening to the citizenry. They're not worried about the property rights or the well-being necessarily of the individuals that comprise their society. They're entirely dispensable cells to a larger project. it's a culture that is sick, that's steeped in a wrong socialist collectivist bent, that is the cause of this. In regards to running to the government, the very institution that is unleashing this horror that's taking place in Europe does strike me as ludicrous. You don't run to the person who broke your legs for medical aid. I hope that can clear that much up.
Okay, so how do we get rid of solve the problem in Europe?
All you can do is spread ideas. All you can do is spread ideas and fight against this. Okay, and at the same time, your issue, the issue that you took with me in regards to Larkin Rose, you have to understand Larkin Rose's basic philosophical premise, which might not be yours. And this is what I've been banging my head up with fellow anarchists and libertarians is that their entire premise is approaching this issue of embracing open borders as an intrinsic good, regardless of everything else, regardless of the sociological stats, regardless of the welfare state, regardless of the ideology, the ideology of the people that are steeped in a certain ideology that are coming from these third world Middle Eastern countries. Regardless of all that, you have it's an intrinsic good. You keep those borders open. Otherwise, it's statism upon statism. It's bad enough, as far as Larkin was concerned, to have a state, to have the welfare state. But now that if you close the borders, now it's just statism upon statism. This is ludicrous to me, for God's sakes. Okay, as I've outlined in my opening statement, depending upon the specific context, the open or closed borders can be detrimental, or it could be beneficial. For example, if you have an open border, and we're just talking about as far as a closed border where immigrants are go through a vetting process. Let's say that you have a Mexican who's a cook who wants to come to America. You have a doctor in India wants to move. Immigration, standard immigration. That's all well and good. We can be thankful for that. In another context, it's not a good thing. Okay, such as what's taking place in Europe. But as far as Larkin Rose is concerned, no, open borders, intrinsic good. Period. That is it. I have a problem with that. Don't you?
Well, maybe I should ask you just a quick question before I proceed on to my next argument. Are you familiar with the Hoppian position, and what's your take on the Hoppian position? Do you agree with Hoppe?
Well, I haven't really looked into his position too clearly. I don't know if my position is ringing familiar to his, but maybe you can outline.
Yeah,
Christopher
Rachel's position was basically a Hoppian position.
Well, my opening statement was a Hoppian position?
No, your statement is not a Hoppian position. Part of it is, your idea that there shouldn't be open borders, there shouldn't be closed borders, that should be private borders. That's pretty well a Hoppian position.
Can maybe you give us a quick bullet point of what Hoppe's position is? Okay,
well, maybe I'll get to my next, if I can have my next 5 minutes, then I will, which is an attack on or a rebuttal of Hoppe's position. Maybe that will help clarify because it covers some of the ground that Victor's talked about.
Okay, so I'm happy. I'm happy doing like 5 minutes, or we can just kind of do a 10-minute segment where you can each kind of have a conversational. It sounds like you guys aren't too contentious. I think we can work through this. So it's up to you guys. No. I like Victor. I gotta say, I admire Victor. I think he's done a lot of good things. I think his Sons of Anarchy meetings that he organizes are really good. Okay. But I think Victor. He has a fragile ego. He gets too riled up when people call him names. If Larkin Rose calls him statist, so what? Big deal. It's not a big deal. But he lashes out and calls Larkin a commie, and he says he has the epistemological rage of an ant or a gnat or a turd in one of his phrases.
that sort of thing is not conducive to good argument. It's not argument at all. It's just name calling. And, I thought we left name calling behind when we left fifth grade. But, name calling seems to be a popular thing within elements of the libertarian movement, particularly with the people who have this concern about Islam and immigration and take a Hoppian position. That there seems to be a lot of uncivil behavior, shall we say. Anyways, here's my argument on Hoppe. Hoppe's basic argument is that smaller territories within larger ones have right to secede from the larger body, and this right of secession extends right down to the individual. And I agree absolutely with him on that. In a fully privatized society, Hoppe says everything is privately owned and there are no geopolitical borders at all. In this society, private citizens could join together to form covenant communities, which can be as restrictive or liberal as they choose. And this could include outright racist communities, as well as illiberal communities with strict conservative values and strict limits on free speech. And Hoppe actually seems to favor that sort of community. The current situation with government controlling access to everywhere within society through common property and allowing immigration results in what Hoppe calls forced integration. Citizens who might not like certain other people based on their race, religion, or what have you, are forced to associate with these people. But on the other hand, Hoppe also acknowledges the opposite, that the converse is true. If governments restrict access, it results in forced exclusion for people who would welcome other people. So to get out of that conundrum, Hoppe advocates that only people who have a clear invitation from a host or an inviter within their country can come in, but the inviter must post a security bond guaranteeing the visitor's good conduct while he is here. Moreover, he argues that only people, and I'm going to quote here, that satisfy the human qualities of skill, character, and cultural compatibility should be allowed to stay. Further, he argues that they must have an employment contract, and all immigrants must demonstrate through tests not only English proficiency, but all-around superior, above-average intellectual performance and character structure, as well as compatible system of values, with the result of which he says is a pro-European immigration bias. Now, in my opinion, Hoppe's conclusions don't follow from his arguments. His conditions still entail forced exclusion. A proper conclusion would be that the citizen ought to be allowed to form a proper conclusion would be that citizens ought to be allowed to form restrictive covenant communities if they don't want to associate with other people. And in fact, such communities exist. I wrote a while back on socialist communities within a capitalist world, outlier communities of dedicated socialists, like communities like Twin Oaks in Virginia or East Wind in the Missouri Ozarks. These are socialist enclaves, and libertarians can form these enclaves if they want to form their isolationist little covenant communities. Heck, they can do that now. There's nothing restricting them from doing them. There's also worker cooperatives, worker-owned businesses. There's over 100 of these listed by the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives. Surely Hoppe and like-minded people can do the same, form covenant communities that he can live in without having all these human trash, as he likes to call it, bothering him. There's gated communities that are restricted owners. Some are very exclusive. None of the riffraff that Hoppe wants. But Hoppe wants to impose his conservative paradigm on everyone. What if a restaurant owner wants, restaurant owner X wants to invite a unilingual French chef to work in his eatery? Why should he be restricted by the government from hiring whoever the heck he wants? Why can't a California farmer hire a Mexican worker if he wants? Who is Hoppe or the government to tell him otherwise? Hoppe's suggestion that everybody needs to have an invitation first before coming to America and or a job offer or a place to stay, not to mention that everyone hiring or inviting or lodging a foreigner has to post a peace bond on his behalf, that would wreak havoc on the tourist industry. Every hotelier has to post a peace bond for every guest in his hotel. Every landlord has to post a peace bond for every tenant who's not a citizen. How is this not coercive? How does this not violate non-aggression principle? And why just foreigners? Crime studies by the Cato Institute show that domestic citizens are more likely to engage in crime than foreigners. So why not make it mandatory for all hoteliers, landlords, and employers to post peace bonds on all their customers, tenants, and employees? To ask the question is to realize the absurdity of Hoppe's argument. There are a raft of other contributions.
That was 5
well,
minutes.
Okay, well, I'm going to leave it at that. I think that sort of gets my point. I'll make another point later in a later statement.
All right, Victor?
Yeah, okay, yeah, Marco, in regards to you taking issue with my of how I've approached Larkin Rose, I don't know if that's of any specific interest to the listeners, other than that I might have chaffed at you a little bit of how I approach, but try to keep the context here. This is a man that started pelting me with all types of labels, going on to that whole, you don't like brown people, you're a statist. It's coming out swinging at me. Yeah, I'm going to swing back, absolutely. But, if I just did that to the schoolyard insults without actually providing substantive arguments in counter at some point in time, finally, yeah, that would be a problem, for sure, But, yeah, you throw a punch at me, I'm going to hit back. Now, in regards to Hans Hoppe, probably I am recalling now, maybe I do more familiar with this position than I thought I was, but you seem to be much more immersed in it. It is true that Hans Hoppe does point out that what's called free immigration, the free immigration position is not analogous to free trade, okay, as some libertarians have claimed. I think that's part of his argument. Immigration and free trade is not necessarily something that comes together, and I think that that's what a lot of libertarians and anarchists think, that they just look at human beings as economic cogs. So if the state comes in with any kind of barriers or restrictions, they're restricting free trade, necessarily so. Yes, that is a part of it, but it's not in all cases. The freedom of association, the spontaneous global movement of people engaging in freedom of trade is not what is happening in Europe, for example. In the case of goods being traded from one place to another, there is always and necessarily a willing recipient. With state-managed immigration, it is the ruling elite who are moving people about as just so much cattle. They are calling all the shots. They decide when to close a border, when to open a border, who is permitted entry, who is to be denied entry, on what basis and for what reason for denial of entry or for permission of entry. All of this is statism. Immigration is just a giant government program. Now, it is impossible to truly believe that Europe will be a freer place after several more decades of uninterrupted mass immigration from the third world. It is lunacy. As far as Larkin Rose and a large portion of his ilk, it's not just, put all this on the shoulders of Larkin Rose. As far as they're concerned, regardless of context, which he makes a mockery of, you close those borders, God damn it, even to the third world, you're a statist. Now, that philosophical premise is fraught with disaster. And that's why I am particularly emotional on this subject, because the entire Western canon, which is another thing that these people make a mockery of, they hold property rights and the non-aggression principle as some kind of ghostly abstraction without, as if it could be removed from the philosophical ground upon which it rests, which is the Western canon. If we take an ideology of the type of ideology that is characteristic of the Middle East, Islam, there is absolutely no way you're going to have free property rights under that type of ideology. And ideology sets the tone of what the politics are to be. It's the culture that we have to look at. And the anarchists and libertarians better take a very serious look into the issue of cultural Marxism. I think, does that cut off my statement?
You have 30 seconds if you have anything else.
No, that's okay. We can proceed.
Okay, so why don't we Marco, unless you have anything quick or immediate, we can move on to. We have a couple questions in the queue for you guys.
Well, yeah, something I just didn't quite get to in that, Hoppe compares. He idolizes the feudal state when kings ruled, absolute monarchs ruled, and he hypothesizes a king as an owner of the government, and that now we have democracy, which is everybody owns the government, which means nobody really owns it, and that anybody can become the ruler, and that they don't have this long-range vision that a king would have, not realizing that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts. And so he says immigration policy should be based on what a king would do in order to maximize the return of his kingdom as his personal property. Actually, what he should do is he should compare democracy to a corporation, as a corporate enterprise. In a society, an ANCAP world, where all roads, airports, and other points of entry are owned and operated by private corporations, there are no restrictions on customers save one: can you pay the freight? So the I-5 highway, which runs from Canada to Mexico, could possibly be owned by a company, call it the I-5 Corporation in Ancapistan. They could well expand into Canada and Mexico if those countries also became anarchist zones. One long highway run by one corporation running from top the continent to the bottom. Does Hoppe think that such a company could give a tinker's damn about the religion, skin color, or other irrelevant factor about the customers? No, they would be open to all who would pay the toll. For Hoppe to hypothesize that the United States government should act as some sort of mythical poobah with scepter, throne, and royal jewels would act is ludicrous. The proper analogy is that the government should act as a private corporation owning the roads, airports, and other points of entry would act, motivated by profit. That an economist can miss this fundamental point is absolutely astounding. As the de facto owner of these roads, airports, and so on, if the government wanted to do something to match what would happen in an anarchist society, then let them get rid of their nosy Parker border guards and replace them with toll booths.
So why don't we get right into Q&A? We'll address the question to the person that the questioner addressed it to, and then we'll give the other person a few minutes to respond if they have any thoughts. Kason?
All right, everybody. So the first question is for Victor, and that is Victor Pross for a border wall? So over to Victor. You'll have 3 minutes whenever you're ready.
A border wall, such as what's conceived in Trump's mind, you mean? Like
yeah, they're referring to the
United States?
Through a little bit of questioning, they're referring to the USA-Mexico border.
Oh, okay, yeah. No, I have no I have no espousal of a wall or against a wall, or as far as that's the concern. I don't. I'm not sure that other than when it comes to the issue of standard immigration, where you have vetting, where you have a process or so-called legal entry. Insofar as you do have a welfare state, I'm only happy when the state does follow up in suit with immigration policies of proper vetting. We can be thankful for the state doing that, but that does not mean necessarily, therefore I am for a wall. Now, if somebody was to ask me, would I advocate the tearing down of any kind of borders or walls when it comes to, say, to Israel with just let the free entry of Palestinians or whatnot, I think that would be a ludicrous position. However, I would not think, but I wouldn't venture to say that Larkin Rolls would agree with me even on that.
Okay, Marco, would you like to comment?
Well, yeah, in his statement there, he just said he supports proper vetting. Well, finally, he's taking a position on something that he thinks the government should do, that they should vet potentially dangerous, violent people. And I agree. But, what about, immigration in general? Let's ignore Islam. Let's ignore all these violent thugs that are invading Europe right now. But just immigration in general. How does he feel about immigration in general? Should there be open borders? Like, should if, say, Jose, whatever his name is, Jose Delgado from Mexico comes to the border. He wants to work. He's at a farm. He wants to look for work at a farm in California. Does the American government have any right to stop him and say, no, you can't go looking for work in California because this is our turf. Get the hell out.
Okay.
Yeah, well, should I follow up on that, or is there another question?
If
or
you
do you
have
want me to
something,
follow
That
up?
was my question.
we have more questions, but if you have a response, go for it.
Yeah, no, basically, just to make I'll try to make my position clear on this. Okay, I can make a basic evaluation in regards to vetting and prefer it over just come one, come all open door policy. I can prefer that, Marco. I can prefer it and be glad when it is taking place. However, I am not a small government libertarian offering proposals that the government should do A, B, or Z or whatnot. I'm an anarchist. My larger framework, from which I operate, is one of a totally free, society, a stateless society. In that sense, it would be a borderless society, or it would have borders of private property norms in place. In regards to the welfare state, which we cannot drop the total context here, which Larkin and his ilk like to do, is just drop the context. Prior to the welfare state, there was a case of open immigration. People who came into the States, you could walk across the border, you could set up a business if you wanted to, and the type of people that were attracted to the United States when it was much more freer was because they wanted to stake their claim. They wanted to establish a different life. They wanted to build a life, to build a family. They weren't coming for free shit like you have in Europe right now. The welfare state is a magnet for these people coming from all corners of the Middle East.
All right, Kaysen?
Okay, so the next question that we have for you guys here, assuming Western culture is vital for freedom, how can we preserve Western culture in an open border paradigm? And this is directed at Marco first. You'll have 3 minutes. Here you go.
Well, borders are when we're talking about borders, we're talking about geopolitical boundaries. We're not talking about private property lines. And I think talking about private property lines, everything should be privatized, blurs the line a bit. We're talking about geopolitical borders. And with geopolitical borders, people should be free to go wherever they want, as long as they don't violate other people's rights, as long as they're causing no harm, as long as they're not doing anything to hurt other people. If they're non-violent, they're peaceful, they're looking for a job or they're looking for a vacation or whatever they do, why shouldn't they just travel wherever the hell they want to? Look, there are, here's a rhetorical question. Geopolitical boundaries, borders, are on a continuum from totally closed borders to totally open borders. And there's, in fact, no totally closed borders. Even a repressive country like North Korea has some openness. They allow some people in, like Rodham, the basketball player, and they let some people out occasionally if they're diplomats or other things like that. But they're mostly closed and keep people in. But most borders have a continuum that there's some restrictions, and the question is, how much of a restriction do you want? And as a libertarian, I want the restrictions to be minimal. I want the restrictions to be that, if a person actually poses a threat, is potentially dangerous, then I can see a point to keeping them out. But this threat has to be clear-cut, it has to be well-defined, and there has to be procedures in place to determine what the threat is, and that this is actually a threat. Because libertarians oppose not just force, but the threat of force. And if there's a potential threat, absolutely keep them out. I don't have a problem with that at all. When I talk about open borders, I mean for the average peaceful citizen who just wants to travel, who wants to look for work, who wants to find a job somewhere, or just wants to go on a vacation. He should be able to travel as freely from one country to another as we travel from British Columbia to Alberta, or as an American travels from Washington State to Idaho. You know, in crossing, going from California to New York City, from Los Angeles to New York City, you're crossing 10 state borders, not one single border guard at any of those places. And these are all geopolitical borders. They're all entities that have their own governments, their own taxes, their own laws, but there's no border guards. Do we want to have thousands of borders that we crossing going from Los Angeles to New York? But that is what Hoppe envisions, is a fracturing of the American society into thousands and thousands of tiny little enclaves, covenant communities.
All right, Victor, did you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, perhaps if you could rephrase the question for me.
So I think it was basically the idea of, I think, first of all, do you acknowledge that Western culture is vital for the progress of freedom? And if you agree that...
Western culture?
Sorry?
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead. What's the question?
So, first of all, do you agree that Western culture is vital to the progress of freedom, the continued existence of freedom? And if so, what do you think? I guess the question to Marco was, how do you maintain the Western culture in an open border paradigm?
Well, obviously, in a pure open border system, as it is now in Europe, the Western welfare states would simply be overrun by foreigners seeking tax dollars. That's what you would have. That's what's happening. And as libertarians and anarchists, we should, of course, celebrate the demise of the welfare state, but to expect a sudden devotion to laissez-faire to be the likely outcome of a collapse in the welfare state, with the society still embroidered in collectivist ideas at its cultural base, isn't to indulge in pretty an intellectual simplicity. It's preposterous. Immigration as a state program, as I said, these third world migrations, in short, are not free market outcomes. So the question of maintaining the Western canon with an open border policy, that would be, we can ask a question for the open border libertarian. The question would be about open borders. When is too many? When is too many? When do we cut off the faucet? According to the pure open border position, there is no cutoff line. It doesn't matter if it's 7 billion, for Christ's sakes. The answer is none. You do not cut off the faucet or draw the line at any point in time, because once you do that, the open border stance becomes a closed border stance. So as far as the open border advocate is concerned, you let in as many as want to come to that welfare state haven, and you will not have a free society. Absolutely not.
Marco, do you want to take about a minute to respond to that?
No, I'm just going to pass.
All right, Kaysen, what's up?
All righty. So our last Q&A right here is directed at Victor. And it's, shouldn't Victor advocate the restriction of the welfare state to citizens or the abolition of it? Okay, coming over to Victor, you got 3 minutes, partner.
Yeah, no, in regards to that, I've anticipated that type of question, and I think I've probably answered it maybe about like 10 or 15 minutes ago. But yeah, of course, like my larger framework is to espouse libertarian anarchist ideas of a stateless society. These derivative issues of borders is on the side. But insofar as we have a welfare state, you cannot have this open border policy, and you cannot have them just coming from any parts of the globe at the same time. There is a fundamental philosophical premise here that's taking place that is absolutely erroneous at root, and that is to assume that each and every human being on the face of the earth is an economic agent, and that all cultures are relative. You can't say that one is better than the other. You can't have these ludicrous caricature type of anarchists talking about the private property rights and individual rights and the non-aggression principle. and think that that's the absolute, that's what we are to hold up. But you can't have that with it. You can't. But all cultures are relative. You know, they can become cultural relativists. They become subjectivists in ethics. This is a very unfortunate stance that those type of anarchists who have no philosophical grounding whatsoever, and they just take the non-aggression principle as some kind of ghostly abstraction in an ivory tower that does not apply to real life scenarios, such as the welfare state and the type of ideologies that these people embrace. That's been a lethal mistake in this whole freedom movement.
Marco, over to you.
Well, I'm not sure that Victor actually answered the question, and I didn't really understand all of his answer, but I'll say that to this question, shouldn't Victor advocate a restriction of the welfare state to citizens or the abolition of it? I'm in favor of restricting the welfare state to citizens, and I'm in favor of abolishing the welfare state. I think it should be abolished. Recently, Donald Trump was called to task because he advocated restricting welfare rights to citizens, exactly as this questioner has posted. And in fact, immigrants cannot collect welfare in the United States. And it was a law passed by, of all people, Bill Clinton. So, you know, ever since the Clinton administration, immigrants cannot collect welfare in the United States until they become citizens. I think it's either the citizens or they've had 5 years residency. So, you know, the idea that in the United States, people are going there to be welfare bums, that's simply not true. They're there to find jobs, to find work, to find opportunity, to find freedom. I say more power to them. You know, there's an interesting book. I don't know if you've read any Eric Hoffer. This book of his, The Ordeal of Change, the last chapter of it is called The Role of the Undesirables. And he makes the argument that these people that Hans Hermann Hoppe refers to as human trash, that Christopher Chase Rachel refers to as shit tier people, are in fact the people who created the United States. They were the pioneers. They were the founders. They were the people who blazed new trails. They were the discontented. He argues that people who are satisfied, who are comfortable with their careers, with their jobs, with their families, they don't uproot and go and elsewhere to look. It's the discontented. It's the malcontents. It's the criminals, the drunks, the ne'er-do-wells. These are the people. The undesirables are the ones who root up, who are restless, who go and seek new frontiers and new boundaries, and they're the ones who really blazed the trail in America and set America and created the America that we know today. That people, when they have the freedom to create and to develop, will do so, and that there's no such thing as human trash in that sort of sense that Hans Hermann Hoppe thinks of.
Can I?
Yeah, go for it.
Sorry. Yeah, can I respond quickly before we take a next question, or I guess there's more questions in the queue?
I think we have one more. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. Marco, let me just ask you. You know, just straight up, like you're obviously you're very familiar with the works of Ayn Rand and objectivism, right?
Yeah, I think Victor and I both came from an Ayn Rand background. Victor has often mentioned Ayn Rand, and I think he and I have probably read a lot of the same stuff. I've read everything that Ayn Rand wrote while she was alive.
Okay, very well. Then you're well versed. I would say that. Yeah, and the reason why I'm bringing up Ayn Rand is that with all the things where we can differ and where I would depart from her on parts of her philosophy, that's all well and good. But I don't know why you're taking confusion in regards to the type of. Do you not agree that philosophy is hierarchical in that politics rests on a certain body of fundamental philosophical ideas as rooted in metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics, and hence comes whatever kind of politics will follow from a society that has a predominant philosophy at its base? That politics is merely the culmination.
I agree, absolutely. Ayn Rand advocated a positive philosophy this is one of the points I made in one of my 23-minute speech, which I can't give, is that Ayn Rand promoted positives. She promoted objective reality. She promoted reason. She promoted rational self-interest. She promoted individualism, and she promoted capitalism. She didn't call her book on politics socialism and nefarious creed. She called it capitalism, the unknown ideal. She refers to ideals. And unfortunately, there's been sort of a rift in the libertarian movement. Libertarian movement used to be a movement that emphasized positives, that emphasized liberty as something to be cherished and to be pursued, and something that is universal, that everybody strives for liberty, that it's something that everybody can look forward to, look to, that everybody really deep down wants to be free. But the modern libertarian movement has shifted. Instead of focusing on positives like liberty and capitalism and self-interest, rational self-interest and individualism, has focused on demonizing the other. It's focused on statism is evil. It's focused on the evil of statism rather than on the positive value of liberty.
I understand that. I understand.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So if you want to, if you want to make a religious comparison, you could say that libertarianism, in a positive sense, is like the gospel mission type people who sing the praises of the Lord and whatnot. And whereas libertarianism that focuses on the evils of statism is like hellfire and brimstone type preachers that all talk about, don't be a sinner.
Yeah. Okay. Now. So you do agree then that a society that does not embrace individualism, property rights, and so forth, that if you have an ideology that's completely antithetical to that, at its metaphysical and epistemological ethical roots, you do not have a free society in politics. You do agree that you do not ascribe to any kind of relativism.
No, absolutely. I agree that a lot of these Middle Eastern countries are not free countries in any sort of sense that Western societies are free countries at all. I agree. Absolutely.
So therefore, you agree that a welfare, like taking place in Europe, with a welfare state in place, with the orchestration of the governments purposely ushering these people in, you still have an open border. That's an open border policy, whether they're orchestrating it or not, or people just coming spontaneously and organically. And the only reason that they would come for is for the welfare state. And these people do not have a respect for the Western canon. They're living in enclaves and whatnot. Women are, if they show any kind of skin above the ankle, they're harlots. They deserve to be treated in a very brutal way. This is what we have right now. So you do agree that an open door policy, come one, come all, from nowhere, no vetting, nothing like this, just come one, all, come all, cultural relativism, and just in flux, and with a limited number of people from these third world countries with these type of ideologies, is going to lead to the demise of the Western civilization.
Okay, I think we have some more questions. Did you want to continue with that, or do you want to move with questions?
Well, he just asked me a question. If I can answer it, I would like.
Sorry, go ahead.
I believe that potential immigrants, potential migrants to a country, libertarianism is founded on the idea of individualism, and that these people should be judged as individuals, not as part of some group or collective, not as on the basis of where they came from. It should be judged on their own individual merits. I believe in individualism, and I believe that when we start lumping people into groups or categories, they're from some Islamic country or whatnot, I think we're doing a great discredit to the whole libertarian idea that freedom is a universal goal, that everybody deserves the right to be free, that people who want freedom, we should accept people with open arms, and that, you have to judge people as individuals, not as part of some collective or group. It's just, that's collectivism, and I'm against it.
Yeah, and would you consider a closed border system as one that does not have a vetting process? This closed border means nobody comes in whatsoever. Does not a so-called closed border position include like proper immigration and going through the legal route and vetting and so forth? Is that not what's understood by a closed border?
Well, as I said, that borders are on a continuum. Like the border between Alberta and British Columbia, there's no border guards. It's a completely open border, yet those are two distinct geopolitical entities. And I would like to see a world of where, you know, you can go where you want without nosy Parkers asking you a lot of busybody questions. It's just none of their business. If you know, in a completely private ANCAP world, it's the owner of the roads, the owner of the airports, the owner of all these entities who would decide, and they would decide basically on can you afford to pay, and that is as it should be. So if governments were to adopt a policy based on what would happen in a capitalist world, well, the best they can do is put up a toll booth and say, yeah, you know, you can use our road as long as you pay the freight. But to restrict somebody on the basis, you know, of their ideology or their, you know, where they came from.
I think I understand what you're saying. So you are in fact advocating an open, even if that involves what's taking place in Europe. Who the hell has the right to say that a mass influx without any kind of vetting process that presumes a position of where denial can be it could be the answer to somebody who wants to come in, because that's what a vetting process is. Some people permit it, some other people aren't. So you're saying get rid of that. Let's reinstate an open border policy, because that mass influx from the Middle Eastern countries, you cannot make any kind of sociological judgments of them, and they are to be taken as individuals. I mean, the first to be permitted entry unconditional entry, and then whatever they do after that, then yeah, you could act accordingly after the fact of crimes. Is that your premise?
Yes, people should be judged on their actions, not on what they might do. People should be judged on what they do. If they commit evil acts, then of course they should be punished. They should be deported. They should be whatever. But you know, I don't have a problem with vetting in the sense that if somebody who wants to immigrate or come into or migrate to a country poses a clear threat, you know, he's a member of some radical group that has been known to be involved in violence or anything like that, yeah, that's a clear threat. But it has to be a clear threat. It can't be just because he might do something or other like that. No, we have Victor talks a lot about Western culture and Western heritage, as does this questioner. Western culture includes the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. And I think that's a very important part of our culture, and I hold to the presumption of innocence. If a person poses no clear threat, then I think he should be able to travel where he wants.
Okay, well, we can move along if you want. If there's another question in there, I mean, this go back and forth for a little bit, but I don't know what timing we're on or what Patrick wants to do at this stage.
Yeah, I think we're at about an hour and 15, so we have a few questions, and then we can do closing arguments and wrap it up.
Yeah.
Jason?
Righty. Hello. So the next question we have is, can Victor clarify how one closes a border without violating the NAP? And upon asking them, hey, can you just specify non-aggression principle is the specific thing that they are asking about. So, Victor, 3 minutes to you whenever you're ready.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. Basically, I don't know if this person walked in the middle of the movie, but as I stated very clearly from the outset, I hope this thing is not going to dog me forever afterwards in my anarchist career and interacting with people. But again, to reinstate, I am not for or against open or closed borders. They are state constructs. Now, in in regards to the current world, taking the current world as an empirical reality and not just to subside up into some ghostly abstraction ivory tower and hold open door policy, intrinsic good policy. Like I say, I do not expect the government to do jack shit, which Marco took issue with. But the reason why I don't is because these people have proven themselves to be criminals who do not care about the ultimate protection of their citizenry. They are dispensable cells. They're engaged in a social experiment. They are proceeding from basic philosophical premises such as cultural Marxism, multiculturalism. They are totally immersed into this ideology, and to hell with the citizenry. They are dispensable cogs. They're talking. What we have now with the government, even here in Canada, let alone Europe, you have these hate speech laws. You have a clamping down on so-called Islamophobia. So you don't run to the government for protection from these people. These are the people who broke your legs. You do not run. You don't go to them for medical aid, for Christ's sakes. So do not count on open or closed borders. Each brings their own disaster or benefits depending upon the total context. However, I can make a basic evaluation, which does not mean I embrace statism, but I can make the evaluation that in a specific context that a closed border or a vetting process is much more preferable than a completely unconditional open entry, come one, come all, no matter where you're coming from in the globe, no matter what the current politics is, and no matter what the numbers. That is a recipe for disaster. And this is not a theory. I'm not spouting off any kind of like conspiracies or hypothesis here, ungrounded hypothesis. The disaster that is taking place because of these premises can clearly be seen in Europe. God damn it! And why anarchists are not taking heed of this? They got their heads so stuck so far up their ass that all the information is available of what's taking place in Europe. And I have a theory as to why anarchists are not venturing into this territory. Is because it does have implications to the question of open borders if they were to take a look at Europe. And they're holding in their minds open borders as an intrinsic good, and that's why they do not want to draw too much attention to what's taking place in Europe. Why? Okay. Where's the goddamn anarchist?
Yep.
Okay, very good.
So Marco, the question almost could be applied to your position, as I'm understanding you describe it as well, because you're saying that the government should have the capability to vet people as they come through the border to make sure they're not bad actors. So how do you do that without violating the NAP?
Vetting people and making sure that they don't present a risk or a threat. I don't have any problem with a vetting process to make sure that people entering the country are basically, peaceful, nonviolent people. So I don't have a problem with that.
But yeah, I think the question was, though, how do you do that without violating the NAP? So, for example, I'm a peaceful person wanting to cross the border. Where do you get the right to stop me, to vet me?
Well, that's a good question, and that's why I prefer to look to the presumption of innocence. A person is innocent until proven guilty, and until a person actually does something that is violent, just based on a person's ideas, is to me a wrong approach. But in this context of what's happening in Europe, sometimes we have to take actions that violate our principles. Victor made a big deal here about, I'm not going to call in the state. Well, suppose your house is robbed, Victor. It's burgled, stuff is stolen, valuable stuff and whatnot. Are you not going to call the police? Are you not going to report the stolen property? Are you going to not call the authorities and try and track down the perpetrators of this crime to try and recover your stolen goods? Of course you are, unless you're an idiot. So, if our house was robbed, I'd certainly call the cops. I report the robbery. I'd expect them to do something. I'd expect the state to do something, which is protect my property, protect my life, protect the security of my person. And there's nothing wrong for an anarchist or anybody to call on the state for protection, because that in the live and govern context that Ayn Rand talks about is the proper function of government, is to protect security and safety, protect against violence. And I don't have a problem with that. But it is not to preemptively keep out people on the basis of what they might do. Ayn Rand, in fact, was in favor of immigration because she herself was an immigrant. She said, if there wasn't immigration, a policy that let me in, I'd probably be dead. We would have not had all her great works. So immigration is really important. It's important to have new blood. In fact, historically, it's been shown that immigrants are more likely to become millionaires, more likely to be entrepreneurs, more likely to achieve wealth and success, and less likely to depend on the state than the domestic citizens. That's historical fact. That's been cited, and that can be proven.
Okay, so we have one more question, and then I think we'll do closing arguments. Kason?
All righty, everybody. Last question. Whoever wants to take it, I think this would apply to both. Aren't the NAP and preservation of Western society different principles with the potential to conflict? If so, which one do you choose? Let's start with Victor, and then we'll end with Marco. Coming over to Victor.
What could possibly be of contention? The NAP and what?
The preservation of Western society.
And does that clash with the NAP? Absolutely not. No, it is the West that introduced the ideas of private property and individualism. It took over the basic idea of so-called sovereign states and introduced the idea of the sovereign individual, because a sovereign state, if we were to follow this logically and epistemologically, the state is not some kind of ghostly entity that is separate from and dwarfs the individual. It's nothing more than a cadre of small individuals. It's the individual that matters. This is and the scientific method. There's all types of things that are attributed to the West. The so-called Western or Western values. It's not a skin color. It's not a location. It's a system of core ideas, which includes the NAP, which otherwise could be interchangeable with individual rights, the right to life. So there is no clash. One is integral upon the other.
All right, 3 minutes to you, Marco.
I disagree with Victor there. I think there's a big difference between the NAP and preservation of Western society. Western society is much broader, a much broader context. It's a whole philosophical background that includes such things as rule of law, includes such things as democratic government, limited democratic government is actually part of a Western society, Western culture. And it provides for, there's a lot of demonization of democracy. I know that Hobbes' work is called Democracy, the God That Failed. And democracy as the idea of pure majority rule, yes, that absolutely is a totally flawed philosophy. But what Ayn Rand advocated, and which I agree with and which I support, the idea of limited government strictly limited to protecting individual rights, to protecting our security against violent aggressors, and to have a means of settling disputes in a rational way. I'm all for that. I would rather have a court run by objective principles than a lynch mob if I should be accused of some crime. Lynch mobs work on the expediency of the moment, emotions, passions that run wild. They're not in any sort of sense, objective. Now, I agree that limited democracy, limited constitutional democracy that we have can be distorted and perverted and can be corrupted. And in ours has been in many ways. But in many ways, our Western society provides a mechanism for change. It provides a way of peaceful change. And if I had to choose between the NAP and Western culture, I'd choose Western culture.
Yeah, it looks like we have another debate topic from some other time. It seems that we are dealing with a small government libertarian here in Marco, and so small government, constitutionally based government, or what have you, versus a totally anarchist free society is it seems what we have here. Don't you agree?
Okay, well, we'll have a round two. All right.
Okay.
So I think we have. Okay, we're good. All right, so what we're going to do is closing arguments. You give up to 5 minutes to kind of close things out and make your final points, and then we'll call it.
Who's first?
You want to go first, Marco?
Go for it, Marco.
Sure. Okay, I think that Victor and I agree on a lot of things. We agree that there is a crisis in Europe, that there are serious problems with violent people. And that something needs to be done about it. I think where we disagree is on what needs to be done about it. Victor thinks that having a philosophical position against open borders will solve the problem. It will not. We live in a de facto real world where there are governments, and if we want something to be done, we have to look to those governments to do something. Victor is being disingenuous to say that he wants the government to do nothing. That's absurd, in my opinion. At the very least, government should abolish welfare for immigrants and stop giving them an inducement to come to Europe or to anywhere else. In fact, in the United States, immigrants are not allowed to accept welfare, and they're not eligible for welfare until they've been at least 5 years or until they become citizens. I think that's proper. I think that's a good way to go, and I support that absolutely. But it's a government action, Victor. It's a government action, but that is a step in the right direction. I also believe that where immigrants create problems, where they are violent, where they are violating people's rights, where they're thugs and rapists and all sorts of violent people like that, they should be immediately rounded up and deported back to where they come from. Victor doesn't even advocate that. How can Victor say he's looking for a solution to these problems when he is not in favor of the government doing these things? And I go even further than that. In the so-called no-go zones, I have said clearly that I support government declaring martial law in these areas, sending in the troops and saying, look, you buggers, shape up or ship out. You know, if you're going to be violent, we're going to kick you out. And that's the way it should be. We live in a peaceful society. The government's obligation is to keep the peace, to keep a society where people work together in harmony, where violence is not a way of settling disputes. And if people want to be violent, then they should get the hell out. And I don't have a problem with government doing that. Victor does. And I don't understand his position at all. It is totally contrary to what his objectives are. And he demonizes people like Larkin Rose, who take a consistent position on the non-aggression principle. Larkin is not unaware of these problems in Europe, but he calls for defensive measures that are consistent with the non-aggression principle. Even Hans Hermann Hoppe, I disagree with his conclusions, but Hans Hermann Hoppe himself says that welfare and immigration are two separate issues. They should not be conjoined. Victor conjoins them. And I don't agree with that at all. I think that I agree with getting rid of the welfare state. I agree with getting rid of welfare for immigrants, but that and being able to cross a border and freely travel wherever the hell you want to for pleasure, for vacation, seeking a job, or wherever, that's up to you. That's not up to the government. I want to be able to, if I want to go down to the United States, I don't want to be stopped by some border guard asking me a lot of noisy questions. And when I come back from the United States, I don't want to be stopped by a Canadian border guard saying, hey, what you buy down there? Because we're going to slap a duty on it if it's dutiable. What I buy down there is my business, not the government's business. And I don't really I think we should get rid of border guards completely. And in a completely private ANCAP society, most highways, airports, and other points of entry would be controlled by private corporations whose modus operandi, whose motive is profit. Profit is what runs capitalist society. And they would, if you can pay the airport fee or the toll on the road, you're free to go as you want. You're not restricted. They don't ask you a lot of nosy Parker questions. And that is what an ANCAP society would be. It would be a totally open border society, and that is what I support.
All right, thank you, Marco. Victor, 5 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Basically, in regards to what Marco said there, that I don't want the government to do anything. Just to maybe it's a matter of semantics, but just to be clear on that, I don't expect them to do anything that I would prefer. I don't expect it. I'm not sitting there as an anarchist. I'm not making any espousals that the government should do anything other than be abolished. Okay, I'm an anarchist, right? So, and it does seem like we do have another debate topic here: anarchism versus a limited constitutionally based government. But that's for another time, perhaps. Now, in regards to Larkin Rose, the issue that I'm that I have with him is his holding of open borders as an intrinsic good. Now, you do grant, Marco, that there's a large problem taking place in Europe speak lightly of it, which I shouldn't be, but these problems can be seen in advance. These problems can be seen in advance and prevented in advance. And an unconditional open door policy in today's world is calling for disaster. Again, this is not an hypothesis. It's not a theory that's what might happen. That is what is happening. Okay, that is what's happening, and that is what can be prevented. A vetting process or a closed border, I can prefer all of that in today's world, but I do not expect it. You can call for it, you can vote for it, you can legislate for it, but I expect nothing. The people who are perpetrating these type of crimes are you don't go to them, you do not rely on them. It's ludicrous. Now, the mass influx into Europe is happening under a false pretense. It's not about rainbows and unicorns and big-hearted liberalism. It's places a huge economic burdens are being placed on the domestic citizenry under the guise of refugee crisis. We should just call it what it is. It's a third world invasion. It includes an open door policy. This third world invasion. The politicians there are looking to uproot there's this nihilistic, violent rage, volatile rage against the Western Canada, against whites. Even let's say it is a genocide of some order. And if you do, and once again, as I said before, if you hold to a complete intrinsic approach to an open door policy, if you hold that as an intrinsic good. If the open border advocate was to be asked, when do you turn the faucet off after 7 billion people outbreeding the host population, where you can completely replace that society with an antithetical society to that of Western democracies, or the non-aggression principle being placed in all of the society's institutions, you can completely uproot that, and you're going to completely eviscerate it, and it's going to completely be destroyed. This policy goes on and on and on. That is exactly what's going to be taking place, and you can see the beginnings of that right now. Right now, the surface has certain boil and pop marks that are visible, but now it's going to be a complete infection that's taking place. Now what time do I have there?
Minute 15.
Patrick. Okay. Now, sometimes, I'm torn between laughing and crying when pondering the curious paradox of anarchists calling for open borders that ushers in every sort of third world reprobate, thereby aiding and abetting, ideologically speaking, socialists. It is the socialists who are hot the trot on this whole open border policy. But I guess that probably concludes my time.
Okay. So thank you, Victor. Thank you, Marco, so much for joining us today on this channel for this debate on a very important topic. I hope to continue the discussion with both of you separately or together in the future on this channel. That's an open invitation for either of you or both of you to come on and continue the talk or the debate or whatever you guys feel. I guess we were talking about a round two. So thanks to both of you for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Pat.
Thank you.
And then to the world, to the internet, thanks for watching. I wanted to kind of make a quick open call for debates, for discussions. If there's anyone out there that feels feels strongly on this topic or any freedom or anarchist or libertarian related topic, please contact us. We want this channel to become the forum for debate, for refining the edge of sort of libertarian thought. So thanks again to everyone for watching.